Um, again, I say this word vow over and over again in class, and I try to emphasize how important it is. But I'm sometimes surprised where it shows up. In in the one for pregnant, expecting mothers, it talks about goddesses who have made a vow to protect them, and so on the basis of that vow, they will do it. In I think Sadapravadita, I don't know if he talked about his vow explicitly, but basically by the truth of his dedication, his diligence, right? He was able to heal his flesh, and maybe you remember too, Angulimala from way back earlier in the semester. He also healed somebody on the basis of his vow to not kill people, right? And so there's something to vows, and I don't mean to say that there's some kind of magical practice, although again, it was a part of the Buddhist magic thing. There is something to vows, and when people keep their vows, at least in Buddhism, there's a sense that really powerful things can happen. And like Stephen said, this really goes back to Amitabha's vow that anybody who says his name will be reborn in his pure land. So this is the other power. It is the power of the Buddha. You're basically relying on the Buddha. And I think Patrick mentioned too, there's sort of a parallel with Christianity, right? You could see at least some aspects of Christianity having this sense of other power. Can you imagine that, right? Where you rely on the Father to take care of you, or even the Son to sacrifice himself for the sake of our sins, right? There's actually a pretty strong emphasis on other power in those traditions too. And proponents of this tradition, when they came to America, took advantage of that and basically said, hey, we're doing the same stuff. We're basically the same as you guys. So that's all from last time. This link is actually a link to the final paper. I show you the PDF instead. We don't have to open this. Any questions about other power? One reason I'm emphasizing this term is because in Zen, there is a role for faith and belief, which we'll go over. Maybe we don't have to answer this right now because we haven't really talked about it yet. But there's more of a belief in self-power. So maybe I could ask you to imagine, what do you think self-power refers to? So it's in contrast to other power, self-power. What does this refer to? If we're not relying on Amitabha to take care of us, what do we rely on? Ourselves. How do we do that? What part of ourselves do we rely on? How do we rely on ourselves in Buddhism? Have we encountered this before, Sophie? Yeah, wonderful. So Sophie said Buddha nature. There's something pure, innate, good, enlightened inside of us, right? It's not out there somewhere. It's not out in some pure land somewhere. It's here already, right? It's already inside of us. And that is totally the core of Zen Buddhism. So when I first introduced Pure Land to you, it was a little, let's say, immature, right? It was this old Indian text. It was just this series of images where it's like, okay, you got your gold and your filth, you got your Buddha statue and your stinky flower. That's kind of cool. And the practice wasn't totally clear, but hundreds of years go by and eventually Zen comes along and it gives a pretty sophisticated practice to this idea of Buddha nature. So that's one way we can think about Zen, as this, let's say, logical extension of those earlier teachings we looked at. What's another way? What's another way that we can rely on our own power in Buddhism? So Sophie is absolutely right. Buddha nature is an excellent example, but we've seen more than that, right? Like, for example, in the life story of the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, did he rely on other power or did he rely on himself? He kind of relied on himself, right? Rely on our body. Okay. How do you rely on your body, Kyla? Patrick saying through your mind.
I think like you would use your like obviously you kind of have to rely on your own physical body.
Mhm.
So I think we saw like the Buddha had to figure out how to make it to enlightenment like in his own body and realizing um eventually like, he needed to eat food and stuff like that
Yeah.
to be able to maintain the body. So I think that kind of showed like we are still human when we're going through the process of like that path to enlightenment.
It's a great connection, and I think a lot of us, like Patrick said, we might think of mind meditation, that sort of thing, but I think Kyla's absolutely right. The body is a big part of it, and it's she also expressed the general terms of this concept, but it's the middle way, right? The middle way between too much asceticism. At first, he sort of blamed his body and said, "My body keeps getting me in trouble. I'm gonna really discipline my body and get it under control." Right? Have you guys ever had moments like this? I'm gonna discipline my body and stop eating pizza for dinner like I just did a half hour ago. I saw my student there. He's working behind the counter. It's kind of funny. I couldn't remember his name. So if I ever see you in the future and I don't remember your name, don't be embarrassed because I have way too many students to remember everybody's names. Um, but yeah, so the body is part of it, right? The Buddha went through a moment of extreme asceticism, which was really harsh on his body. Before that, he had the sort of lax approach, the indulgent approach, and then eventually he found this middle way, just like Kyla was saying. And then mind, of course, is part of this too. So we can meditate, focus our minds and our self choices. Uh-huh. What do you mean by choices, Kevin? I like that idea, but what do you have in mind there? We all have to make choices in life. Why do choices matter in Buddhism, Kevin? It is choice, O monks, that I call karma. One chooses and then acts with body, speech, and mind. Was that on the test? I'm pretty sure it was. I'm sure Kevin is typing something brilliant, but I think I'm being impatient and sort of answering for him. But karma, right? Karma is about choice, isn't it? We make moral choices, and then based on the effects, right? We can compare that to an agricultural metaphor. We plant a seed with our choice. Time goes by. Eventually, that seed sprouts, and we enjoy, or maybe don't enjoy, the fruits of those seeds that we plant. Like the discipline is a choice. Fighting persuasions. Not the word I'm looking for. That's probably not the word you're looking for. I'll let you think about it. Too much pressure, right? And so yes, but karma is all about choice. So I'll definitely agree with that. Following through on our vows, yeah. If we make a vow, do we stick to it? And so there is a certain amount of discipline involved, but at the same time also kind of remaining open and flexible and aware of the situation around you, maintaining this middle way. So anyways, I think you guys see the point, right? Actually, most of what we've talked about in Buddhism has really been self-power, and so this other power stuff is kind of new and different, um, at least different from the very early version of Buddhism. I'm going to give you a little exercise now that will let you kind of explore this stuff. Desires, yeah. Desires are a big problem. Yes, maybe we can think about that for a moment too. So if we act based on craving or jealousy or hatred or anger or any of those negative emotions, right? Then we're going to have bad things happen to us. That's what the Buddha taught very early on, right? And so, yeah, just like Kevin is saying, this is something we have to be aware of and look out for and make sure we don't cause problems for ourselves, right? That is kind of what early Buddhism is all about. Oops. And I've made a little worksheet for you all. Actually, I should put the link so you can open it too. And I think Sophie knows what's coming, so she's getting her device up. So here is the worksheet. And basically what I've done is, this is not in any of the reading, so there's no page numbers here for you. I like to keep things tied to the book, but we don't have to always do that. And one reason I highlight this is a very famous exchange of poems. As you're opening it up, maybe if you prefer, you can download it. I'm going to ask you guys to discuss these in a little while. If you don't know how, you can go to File, Download. So you can download a Word document or whatever you want. Or, you know, you can just work online. I don't think it's open for editing for you, though. I think you can only view it. So I encourage you to download it. Then you can edit it. So let me tell you a story. So the background of this story is there is a monastery a long time ago. It's the 7th century. And this is kind of the early days of Zen in China. And it's sort of like a Good Will Hunting kind of scene. Do you guys know this movie? Good Will Hunting? The young Matt Damon. Sophie knows. And Robin Williams, of course, it's a classic. Yeah, okay. So in Good Will Hunting, maybe you guys remember the scene. The character Will is like mopping the floors at MIT or whatever, and there's like some difficult problem that gets put up on the board, and he solves it, and nobody knows who did it at first, that sort of thing. That's kind of what happens here. Shenxiu is this celebrated monk, and he's going to sort of be the next in line. He's going to be the next patriarch, is sort of the official word. And so he writes this poem in celebration. And the poem, I can read it to you. It says, the body is the Bodhi tree, and the Bodhi tree is the tree that the Buddha sat under when he achieved enlightenment. Bodhi means enlightenment. And so it's kind of a double entendre in a way. It's talking about the tree, but it's also talking about enlightenment itself. The body is the Bodhi tree. The mind is like a clear mirror. At all times, we must strive to polish it and must not let the dust collect. So that's the poem. It's very short. I gave some questions underneath, just asking to sort of clarify what the poem's about. And I think you'll find it's actually a pretty good poem. I don't want to criticize it. I think it's actually quite clear and interesting, and it uses symbols in a very clear fashion, and we can actually understand it. Huineng's poem, and he's the Good Will Hunting kind of guy, Huineng's poem takes those same symbols and kind of turns them on their head. He critiques Shenxiu. And so I ask you some questions sort of about how he does that. And so what this illustrates is, in some ways, the birth of Zen. Maybe it's not the birth of Zen, but it demonstrates one important break between Zen and earlier forms of Buddhism. So I won't explain any more than that. But why don't I ask you guys to open up this file. I think most of you guys have opened it at this point. Again, there's a link, and download it, and then discuss these questions. So first, I just want you to think about, how is the mind like a mirror? How can we make sense of Shenxiu's poem? What is he really trying to say? What sort of practice is he talking about here? And then once you feel comfortable about that, I'll ask you to look at the critique, right? How does Huineng critique the poem, rearrange the symbols, maybe even redefine them? And what is the last question I asked? What is the difference between the Buddhist path of practice for Shenxiu and for Huineng? What are they recommending? How do we practice Buddhism according to each of these teachers? So that's the main question. So how does that sound? Do you guys feel ready to do this? Sophie's ready. Good. That means everybody else is probably ready. So I'm going to send you guys to breakout rooms. I'm going to take attendance like I often do. And then I'll come around and talk to you all. Let's see. Groups of 4 or 5 sound pretty good. Okay. I guess I can open this. Okay, are we all back? Looks like we're all back. Hi guys. So tell me what you think about this first poem. The body. Okay. The body is the Bodhi tree. The mind is like a clear mirror. At all times we must strive to polish it and must not let dust collect. We don't have to go through every question. Maybe I can just ask you, what is the practice of Buddhism recommended here? Who can kind of break this down for me and tell me what the practice that Shinshiro is prescribing is? And in order to do that, you'll have to understand the symbols too. Am I mute or something? No.
Is it like meditation?
It could be meditation. Why do you say it's like meditation, Steven?
Because it sounds like polishing the mirror and dust and all that. It sounds like training your mind in some sort of way, trying to like free yourself from like maybe craving or distractions or something like that.
Okay.
So like cleaning the mirror could be like meditation and like trying to make sure that your mind doesn't like strive off the path of enlightenment through intensive training.
Yeah, that sounds great. And just so we're all on the same page, right? We've got the mind is like a mirror. We've got dust that collects. And like Stephen was saying, maybe the dust are these negative emotions like craving and bad stuff. And so we have to be careful and sort of polish the dust, polish the screen, make sure the dust doesn't collect on our glasses as we're looking out at the world, right? We got to polish this mirror. Did anybody else have other good conversations about this poem?
I was thinking maybe it could symbolize self-power.
Please tell us more about it.
Yeah, so I think like because in the second question it's like the mind is like a mirror, and I think it's because of it's more of like a reflection of who you really are, like all the thoughts, emotions, like senses, and it can all be redirected back to your mind.
Mhm.
And because the mind does control everything in oneself, and yeah, like it's still, yeah, I gotta think more.
Okay. Well, what I hear Rafa thinking about is how is the mind like a mirror, and that we were talking about this in our group. That's something I think we could say a lot about. It's a pretty classic image in Buddhism. One thing we thought about is how when you have a mirror, and this actually shows up in the reading. Did we get to this part today? I've read this book so many times I kind of forget which parts are where. No, we didn't get to it yet. I think it's going to be, let me make sure. I think it's going to be at the beginning of next time. Anyways, I don't know where it is, but we didn't read it for today. How is the mind like a mirror is worth thinking about, right? So how does a mirror reflect things? And what Raffaele was thinking about is like, what is it reflecting? Maybe it's reflecting your true self or something like that. I think that's true. One thing, maybe a simpler way to think about it is think of mind is like consciousness or something like that, right? Where it's more specific, or sorry, the consciousness is like a mirror, a more specific part of the mind being like a mirror. And so if you take your consciousness and you direct it at something, ideally you reflect that thing, right? And so if I reflect my mirror of consciousness on this class or on this book, when I'm reading, I don't know if this happens to you guys, sometimes I start to daydream as I'm trying to read, right? Or somebody texts me and I start thinking about my text, or I start thinking about all this other stuff I have to do. And I stop focusing on the task at hand. But of course, like Stephen was saying, and I think like Raffaele was getting at too, we can do our headspace meditation and focus on the present moment and develop our awareness and keep that mirror clean, right? And constantly polish it, keep everything in order. So again, this should be a pretty familiar practice. Again, I think a modern way of thinking about it would be headspace, is trying to maintain this clear awareness. And I don't mean to criticize that. I have criticized headspace in this class. I think there's a utility here though, right? If you can't do this, it's hard to live your life. So I think this is a good form of practice. Although Huineng takes issue with it. So he really does critique this first poem. And I kind of wanted to point you to it with this question, but maybe I can phrase it differently. What is Hui Neng's critique of Shen Xiu's poem? So how is the second poem critiquing the first poem? So the second poem's harder to understand. I'm curious to hear what you guys had to say about it. Maybe before we get to the critique, what is the second poem all about? Who can explain the second poem for us? We're feeling a little less brave about the second poem. Sophie, do you want to try?
It's kind of talking about how like if the mind is the mirror,
Mm-hmm.
and like your mind is also a part of human nature, so if it's basically going indoors and like it's not possible,
Mm-hmm.
your mind could be saved by death or somehow become necessarily
Mm-hmm.
by anything.
Mm-hmm.
So like it's just kind of challenging the ideas put forth in the first poem and like it's more talking to human nature, but also like more thought.
Okay, so Sophie explained it very nicely. Can be led astray from Buddha nature, less about discipline. I like this too. I was about to summarize Sophie's point, but Alexandra, would you like to say more about this? Cannot be led astray from Buddha nature. That's a nice way of putting it. It seems like you're typing or something. So maybe I will take these two thoughts and try to put them together. What Shinsho is saying is, hey, your mind is like this mirror. It's our group agreed that enlightenment is always on the horizon. Okay. Your mind is like this mirror. It's potentially fragile and it's very easily tarnished. It's very easily sullied and made dirty. And in order to prevent that from happening, you have to work really hard, right? There's a lot of work involved in this first one, and there's a lot of work involved in Headspace, and that's why you have to subscribe to it, is because they help you do the work. That's kind of the practice that's being laid out in this first one. The second one, we use the word chill, is quite a bit more chill, right? He really is basically saying, dude, Shinjo, you've got it all wrong. You think that the mind can get dirty? The mind cannot get dirty. There's no such thing as a dirty mind. The mind is always pure. It is always clean. It is impossible for dust to ever get on your mind. And why is that? As both Alexandra and Sophie were saying, because the mind is Buddha nature. It's not out in a pure land somewhere. It's not off with Amitabha in the Western paradise. It's here, it's now, it is everything that you are. Everything you are is enlightenment. And so to identify something impure, unclean, that's just a mistake. It's a mistake. It's a mistaken view of the world. So that's more the second part, right? The mirror is originally clean and pure. Where can it be stained by dust? Buddha nature is always clean and pure. Where is there room for dust? So again, he's equating the mirror to Buddha nature. He's saying your core of your being, your mind, your consciousness is Buddha nature, is enlightenment itself. It is here, it is now. So this first part we could talk about more too, but while we're on a roll here, how do you think, what's the practice for Huineng? I think the practice for Shensho, we sort of already said, right, is you do a little meditation, you try to be careful, you try not to do bad stuff. Again, very good advice, right? This creates a moral society. I think those are all very good things. What is the practice for Huineng? And there's not an easy answer to this. He's not an easy guy to work with, in fact. What do you guys think? What is the practice for Huineng? Aiden says, living your life. Question mark. Why question mark, Aiden? Yeah, how is the practice living your life? Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just really not sure. It's kind of like an open thing, I guess. But he just kind of says how like you're like there's no way of like collecting dust and staining your thing. So just kind of live your life because you're born pure, you're born clean.
Mm-hmm.
So follow your desires if that's what makes you happy.
Mm-hmm. And because your desires are also clean, is what he's saying. Yeah, to follow your desires is not a mistake. Yeah, Alexandra has a very Zen response here. Okay, yeah. She says that the practice is no practice, right? That is a very Zen idea. And that is effectively the answer in a way, right? That the practice is no practice. And if you think about why, because the minute you start thinking like, all right, now I'm practicing Buddhism, now I'm really going to achieve enlightenment, all of a sudden, again, you get all nervous about the dust and keeping it clean and all of these different qualities and characteristics, and you start to think, oh no, I'm so dirty, the dirt is everywhere, the dirt's not coming off, right? You enter into this very anxious world. Whereas, like Alexandra's saying, when you approach practice as no practice, there's no way not to practice, right? You are always practicing. Now, this might be sort of hard for at the beginning, let's say. And so these sorts of practices don't disappear from Zen, but ultimately, like Alexandra stated really quite eloquently, the practice really is no practice. So you might be wondering, how the hell do you write a book about nothing, about no practice? But here we are, reading a book about it. Another way to think about the practice is to think about these sorts of images, right? This poem, again, is challenging. We can read some of the other lines. The mind is the Bodhi tree. Bodhi originally has no tree. The body is the mirror stand. The mirror has no stand. It's contradicting itself, right? It seems like a paradox. A paradox. And so a big part of Zen practice is contemplating paradoxes, because it forces you to bring your mind to places it might not go otherwise, to think about things you might not think otherwise, and then with this struggle of imagining what is this supposed to mean, there is at least a promise of sudden awakening, right? Sudden realization, where again you return to this, we could say, natural state, right? This Buddha nature that has always been in the background, or at least that's what we're being promised here. Okay, I think that's enough. Very nice. Any last thoughts or comments on these poems, on these ideas? We'll continue with the ideas. We're gonna move on from the poems in a minute though. Last thoughts? Do you guys like the worksheet? I don't always make worksheets. Sometimes I don't have enough stuff for a worksheet, but because we didn't have a book this time, I thought I'd give you a worksheet. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. So one thing we also started to talk about in our group is this image. Maybe I will not spoil it for you. What do you see here? What is happening in this image?
Looks like he's hanging up some flyers,
Looks like
some sort.
Yeah, maybe, right? If this is a wall, maybe he's like trying to paste them up there. Picking up trash. It does look like there's trash on the ground. I'll read you the caption. So this is an image of the sixth patriarch. And who is the sixth patriarch? Well, it's none other than Huineng himself. So he is tearing a sutra. What's a sutra? Tathagata Sutra, Lotus Sutra.
It's a Sanskrit literature.
Sanskrit literature. That sounds like pretty good. It's a teaching. Yeah, it's a Buddhist scripture. These are the teachings of the Buddha, right? And they're from his own mouth, is what they say. why in the world, and this is, this is a monk, this is a Buddhist, let's assume that he wants to spread enlightenment and understanding. Why in the world would he tear up a Buddhist scripture? He's trying to send a message. What is his message? Mhm. Excellent. I don't know if you guys could hear Sophie. I never know what you guys can hear. Greg says it's the ultimate Zen move, preaches against his message. He believed that there was a better way than following what was written as quote unquote truth. Yeah, it sounds like you guys are getting it. I'd love to hear, Greg, why this is the ultimate Zen move. That sounds like it's almost like a move in a video game or something. It's the ultimate fighting challenge, the ultimate Zen move. But only if you guys have your microphones hooked up. I'd like to hear some elaborations from Aiden, Gregory, Kyla. Kyla's pretty clear, actually, that there's a better way than following what was written as truth. Actually, yeah, what is the better way? You guys could all elaborate. Aiden, you want to elaborate?
Yeah, I was pretty much like Kyla, just summed up what I had to say. Like his message was that there is no path, and that was probably saying to follow the path.
He's following the path of no path. And something that Sophie highlighted, I don't know if you could hear it, but yeah, I think there's like an echo happening. Tyler says, I think there maybe is because there's enlightenment within all of us, so we don't need to rely on words. Yeah, this is key. Words, right? Words. And this is what Sophie was highlighting too. If you think about it, writing is not the only way to convey meaning, right? And it's a little rigid, isn't it? It's unchanging, it's sort of stuck. And so it's actually sort of easy to criticize this sort of thing. You could imagine something like this happening on January 6th on the steps of the Capitol, right? Is people trying to tear down these rigid systems that feel somewhat oppressive. And so that's really what Huineng is doing. He's saying by holding on to the words too tightly, you will miss the point, right? You will miss the meaning of the words themselves. So he is quite brazenly, right, destroying these scriptures, which, for the record, don't do this, right? This is how you get beat up by some Buddhists, right? You don't want to, never do this. Never be the sixth patriarch. Don't do what he's doing, right? Because if you tried to pull this move at like a Buddhist monastery or something, people would be really upset. They'd be like, what are you trying to do here, pal? Right? And you could say, well, I'm showing that words are empty. And they'll be like, let me show you that my fist is empty, right? Or something like that. So this would really piss people off. And I'm sure he pissed people off. But again, that's kind of the point, is to piss people off sometimes. So it sounds like you guys got it. This is great. I wasn't sure how clear this would be from these poems and everything, but it sounds like you really got it. So I'm impressed. A little background, maybe I'll just take us up to around 8 o'clock, and then, as you can tell, intermission's pretty early today, and then we can go headfirst into the book. So Bodhidharma is this guy, and maybe you can tell just from his facial hair and chest hair, he is a foreigner. So this is Japanese writing up here in the upper right. There are also images of him in China too. He's a very famous figure for Zen, but he's Indian. One reason he's depicted so with such big beard and big eyebrows and so forth is they want to mark him as a foreigner. He's from India. So why is it important that kind of the founder of this Zen tradition is from India? What does that do for the tradition? Just sort of, I don't know, historically speaking. maybe this isn't as obvious as I think it is. This is something I think about in my research a lot. Sophie? Mhm. Perfect. Yeah. And Greg said something similar too. Establishes a lineage. Yeah, it's all about this connection back to the Buddha, right? Because in the end, what we've got is the Buddha is enlightened, and then he passes it down to a bunch of people. Maybe we can give a little ... And then it comes to us, right? And so who is the ... that will connect us to the Buddha? In the case of Zen, it's Bodhidharma. He's in this lineage that goes back to the founder of Buddhism, Siddhartha Gautama, and then he can trace it through China and into Japan. We also saw something similar for Tibetan Buddhism too. And maybe you guys were annoyed that I made you know Tilopa, Naropa, Marpa, Milarepa, and to be honest, it doesn't stop there. So in the Milarepa group, one of his students was Gampopa, Pakmo Drupa, Jigten Gumbo, right? And then figures like Jigten Gumbo went and founded monasteries, and then those monasteries still exist today. And so these lineages are actually incredibly important. They're not always real. They're not always historically accurate. Like people have started to sort of poke holes in some of these and said, did Marpa ever actually meet Naropa? It actually seems probably not. Maybe Marpa studied with Naropa's disciples. Who cares though, right? The way that people remember it, just like Gregory and Sophie were saying, is like this is a direct path that we can link back to the Buddha. And for Zen, they don't even care about texts and words. It's really about this mind-to-mind transmission. And so because Bodhidharma met someone who met someone who met someone who met the Buddha, he has the direct link to the wisdom of the Buddha that he can then bring on into China and into Japan. Actually, I think in an earlier version of this, let's see if this actually shows up. Yeah, Daruma, that's what I was thinking of. Have you guys ever heard of these dolls? Have you ever seen this image before? I think it's in like Animal Crossing or something. I don't know. So this is based on Bodhidharma, right? So this is, maybe you can see it. He's got the same sort of eyebrows. He's got the same sort of beard. Yeah, there's Bodhidharma. And here's a bunch of these dolls. And there's something with the eyes where you can paint in the eyes. Like you paint in one, I don't know, does it tell us? Eyes. Yeah, with blank eyes. And I've never done this before, so I can't actually give you all the details of it, but why do you paint them in? Yeah, you set a goal, right? You paint in one and you say, I'm going to do this thing. It's almost like setting a vow of some kind, right? And then you paint in the other after you do the thing. So it's pretty cool. So anyways, Bodhidharma is an important image, right? This sort of bearded foreign guy. His echoes find their way even to Animal Crossing or wherever you might see that little doll. So that's him. Discipline, meditation, insight into Buddha nature. I call this tradition sort of chill, but it's actually not chill. If you keep reading the book, we've already seen it, right? There's actually a lot of rules and a lot of, well, to use this word again, discipline. People can be hard on each other in this tradition. In fact, they can be angry sometimes. This is something that we talked about in our group, is that if there is no dust, then some of these usual negative emotions that we are actually kind of sensitive to now from studying Buddhism, but also from just existing in this world, all of a sudden, all of this becomes fair game as long as it leads to enlightenment, right? And so it tends to be a little bit macho, even, this tradition. You might notice there's almost like a military side to it, which again, I feel free to critique it. You can critique anything in this class that you want, but at the same time, I encourage you to see its value as well. We can do both. Buddha nature is key. We've already talked about that. Koan is something we haven't talked about yet. Have you guys heard of this before? Koan? Greg, what's a koan?
It's like a saying you're meant to, what's the word? The words are escaping me right now, but it's like they say like a bull's in a china shop or something like that, and you're supposed to, or like I'm getting that wrong.
No,
Something
no,
about
no.
a bull's tail. That's the only one I can remember. But it's just this description meant to jog your thinking about something else or see the deeper meaning in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, in some way, well, I guess first of all, thank you, Greg. And in some ways, what we were doing here is almost like a koan, right? These short poems are almost like a koan. I asked you, what is the practice? And I said the practice is to think about this poetry. And like Gregory was saying, he was trying to come up with another example of one, but he doesn't need to. We've seen some, right? You didn't realize it, but we were doing a koan practice just now. It literally means public record. In Chinese is gong'an. Koan is the Japanese word. And I guess just so we're clear, Zen is the Japanese pronunciation of a Chinese character. In Chinese, it's called Chan. In Korean, I think it's Son. I want to believe. I don't know Korean, but it's all the same character. In Sanskrit, it's dhyana. And dhyana just means meditation. So even though I was saying that the headspace meditation is more for this earlier vision of Buddhism, the Zen folks love meditation too. As you can see, meditation's right here as well. So what do you meditate on? You meditate on Buddha nature, right? You meditate on this inherent enlightenment inside of you. And just like Gregory was saying, there are these weird sayings or questions that jog your thought and make you think about new things. And again, the goal is to get you to think about enlightenment, to bring you to enlightenment, to wake you up to enlightenment. And maybe I'll give you more examples. We'll see more. We've seen some examples from what we read for today. They're often strange. So they often bring up silence. Maybe I can ask you a question about this. Why do you think silence is an important image for Zen? Are you all illustrating silence? Is that what you've been doing this whole time? Is this a Zen teaching? Are you guys all Zen masters? Illustrating your wisdom with your silence? Well, again, we can go back to this poem. The poem's quite powerful. If activity is a problem, if the real practice, like Alexander said very nicely, is no practice, if you take this into the sonic realm, then speaking, words, right? Remember, this guy's tearing up written words. He'd probably tear up spoken words too, if he could. Words are a distraction. It allows you to refrain from the extra noise that distract you from enlightenment. Exactly. So there's a sense that enlightenment is silence, right? By sitting in silence, embracing silence, there's an enlightenment inherent to that too. So many of these koans are actually about silence. Some really famous ones are, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Have you guys heard that one before? I think I heard that on The Simpsons, and then Bart goes like this. And I didn't really understand any of it, to be honest. I didn't understand why it was funny, because this was when I was like a little kid. And none of this made sense to me, but now it does make sense to me, and hopefully I can help you guys make sense of it too. What is the sound of one hand clapping? Well, of course, two hands clapping makes a sound. One hand clapping is silence, right? And so it's bringing you back to silence, but it's allowing you to think about the absence of the clap, right? Whereas what usually would happen with two hands is the sound. It allows you to really meditate, consider the silence itself, enter into this silence, refrain from the extra noise, like Kyla is saying. Another one that kind of plays with sound is a tree falls in the woods and no one is around. Does it make a sound? You guys heard this one? also, it's kind of an interesting riddle in and of itself, but if we take it in a Zen perspective, there are sort of interesting implications. Does anybody want to comment on this one? How does this connect to Zen ideas? Or just Buddhist ideas in general?
Was it like sort of like a paradox because like we'll never really know?
That's a good point. We never will know, right? We can try to imagine it. Why can't we know, Stephen?
Well, because if no one's around to hear it, then no one will ever know the situation. Like like you can make a case for either, technically speaking.
Mm-hmm. Kyla says maybe things only matter when you give value to them. And so we give value to these sounds when we hear them. We say that's loud, I don't like that, or that sort of has a nice beat, I do like that, or whatever. This is a soothing sound, this is a rough sound. Yeah, there's almost a stripping of qualities, right? Pulling these qualities away from these sounds because nobody's there to judge them, right? And again, I think this was actually on The Simpsons too. And then Bart says something like, yeah, of course it makes sense. You know, and we could imagine like putting a camera in the woods and we leave and we can say, look, there's a sound. You guys are all idiots for asking this question. But again, this would be missing the point. And, you know, Bart sort of hilariously misses the point in that episode. The goal here is to bring you back to silence. So I think you get it now. And then disruption too. Sometimes it's weird. Sometimes it's unsettling. Weird stuff happens. You're like, what is that, right? And it is supposed to turn your world upside down and potentially even disturb you, right? There is almost a disturbing element to this practice, and at least from within the tradition, they argue it is there to enlighten you, right? To break you out of your normal way of thinking and bring you closer to enlightenment. But again, we talked about this in our group. There's also a slippery slope here, right? When you're constantly breaking people out of their usual modes of thinking, if their usual modes of thinking are conventional ethics and you're breaking the molds of conventional ethics, then that you're walking on sort of thin ice there. So just like in Tantric Buddhism, there also are some kind of naughty Zen practitioners. And I put that very lightly. So let's call them abusive, right? Because that's what they are. Morinaga is not one of them. I wouldn't teach this book if he were, at least not as far as I know. Maybe I should do more research into that. So anyways, that it's one warning that I suppose we cannot escape in this day and age. And one last piece, here's Bodhidharma again, drawn by Hakuin, or at least that's what they say. And Hakuin is this 18th century teacher. He's cited toward the end of the reading for today, page 75. And I think these three things will really help us understand this book. So this is the last thing I'll say, and then we can take a break. Belief, doubt, and determination. The first half of this book is really all about these three things. I've asked you to write a paper about this if you would like to. So clearly, I think they're important, and I think they can help us kind of break through this book. So belief and doubt, we usually think those are opposite things, right? Here we are being asked to do both. But you have to think, what am I believing in and what am I doubting? So belief is believing in your potential. It's thinking, I am this Buddha nature guy that we've been talking about this whole time, right? Believing that I have this capacity to be good, to do good things in this world. And this is something, you know, I think I certainly struggle with this. I don't know about you guys, but there is sort of a, you know, believe in yourself. This is something that floats around the internet in American society. And so this is something I think we can, you know, try to take into our lives. We don't have to talk about it as Buddha nature, but to believe in a potential, like I could be so good. That is something I could be, right? That's where greatness really begins in a way. So where does doubt come in? We often think of doubt as a problem that will cause us to lose our belief, right? And we don't want too much doubt. But this actually says doubt is important, but it's doubting your ripeness. It's doubting that you have achieved that thing yet. So again, the subtitle of this book, an ongoing lesson in the extent of my own stupidity. He's calling himself stupid. He's not calling you stupid. He's calling himself stupid, right? He's thinking, all right, I'm not there yet, right? I could be great. I have the capacity to be great. Everybody has the capacity to be great. I'm just not there yet, right? And the combination of these things creates a gap. Can you see that? It creates a gap where I am here, I want to be there, I'm gonna do it. For goodness sake, right? And so that is the determination that's being described here, right? The combination of these two things creates determination, where you think, I can do this amazing thing for myself, for society, for whatever it is that I want to do. I haven't done it yet, but I will do it, and I can do it, and I will make my way to do it. And I think it's a very powerful combination of ideas, right? If Hakuin were a motivational speaker, I think he would do a great job. So I think maybe that's enough. We can take a break. Any questions before we take a break? And this is just kind of a little brief introduction. We'll come back to these ideas as we go through examples in the book. Okay, if there are no questions, let us take a break. I'll pause a while. We started reading it last week, but we are only getting to it now. But of course, the things we just talked about are kind of a prelude for this book. Do you guys have any impressions off the bat? I know that's a little bit of a risky question from my side because maybe no one has impressions, but any impressions of the book so far? Novice to master? As you are thinking about that, I can give you some background on the author. Here's his picture. As you can tell, he's dressed like a monk. This is what at least some monks look like in Japan. Here I wrote his name. Roshi is sort of a term of respect to call somebody Roshi. Maybe it's easier for us to just call him Morinaga, just because he has a teacher that we can call Roshi, and I don't want to confuse you with too many Roshis. So his name is Soko Morinaga, and if it was not clear, he is a monk. He's a Zen monk. This is a story about how he became a monk. If you look at his dates, he was born in 1925. He passed away in the 90s, so he's been gone for actually kind of a long time now. This was originally written in Japanese. It was then translated into English by Belinda Attaway Yamakawa. In the acknowledgments, she says thank you to Morinaga Roshi. So she was a student of Morinaga, and she seems, this is almost like an act of devotion to translate this book for him. And then it was published in English in 2004. I'm not sure when the Japanese was published. I don't think it says here. Maybe I should look that up. But anyway, so this came out a pretty long time ago, 2004, right? What happened in Japan during Morinaga's life? Did any important things happen in Japan between the years 1925 and 1995? A lot of things happened, in fact.
World War II.
World War II is a big one, yeah. So that's one thing that happened. And so leading up to World War II, yeah, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, I'm sure you guys have heard of this, colonialism. And I don't know if Aiden is thinking Japan was colonized. Sorta. Maybe you could talk about MacArthur's time in Japan as colonialization, but it's more Japan was an empire, right? They colonized other countries. And Morinaga reflects on all of this, right? You might, let's see, do I have I think it's on the next slide. I have more about his life. Yeah, he reflects on these wars, right? He grew up at a time when, so yeah, World War II starts in the late 30s. So he would have been like 14, 15 years old when World War II starts. But even before that, right, the Japanese Empire is going out, taking over parts of China, Manchuria, Southeast Asia, eventually goes down into Singapore, right, and through Burma, so pretty extensive. And then they bomb Pearl Harbor is what, December 7th, 1941? Is that a date that will live in infamy? Is that carved into your guys' minds? It's carved into my mind for some reason. I think my history teacher made me memorize that at some point. It's a good date to have in your mind, 1941. Let's look it up. I want to make sure I'm not giving you bad information. December 7th, 1941. Yeah, Pearl Harbor. A date that will live in infamy. So anyways, that's a good date to remember. So how old was he then? He was young. He was 16. Am I doing math right? Yeah, he was only 16 when that happened. So he didn't fight in the war. He would have been too young, but he was a young man during the war, and he was given propaganda and, you know, kind of taught to think that this was a just war. Let's turn to this page, shall we? Now we have a book we can read together. So page 18 is where that comes from, is that right? That seems like a mistake, is it? No. This is a righteous way. How could we begrudge? No, I think I wrote the wrong page there. Prospect of my own death. Maybe it is that page. I don't know. I can't find it. How can we begrudge a country? War of evil. I feel like I just read this, but now I don't see it. Is it on the next page? Oh, it's on the next page. It's on 19. Or is it 20? Oh, there it is. Yeah, it's on 20. Okay. I put the page too early. So anyways, he grew up during this time where they're thinking about this war as a kind of a good thing, as something that you can get involved in and potentially help your country, right? Oh, wait, no. Actually, no, I had it right. It was 18. Yeah, then on August 15th, 1945 came Japan's unconditional surrender, the war that everyone had led to believe was so right, so just, the war for which we might gladly lay down one's life. Actually, I think that's a typo in the book. Lay down our one life. Oh, our one as in our single life. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Was instead revealed overnight as a war of aggression, a war of evil. Those responsible for it were to be executed, right? And so this is something that really kind of shook Morinaga, and I think we could say his generation to the core, right? A comparison you could make is almost like Vietnam War in America, right? Obviously, none of us were alive then. I wasn't alive then, but maybe your parents, maybe even your grandparents would be able to tell this story better than I could. Before that, we were sort of the country on the hill, right? World War II was this just war. And so we were all kind of on the same team, on the same side. Yeah, we should fight the war because it'll save the world. And World War I, kind of the same thing. Korean War, yeah, you know, that was fine. But once you got into Vietnam War, it felt like this war of aggression, right? And again, if you guys are history majors, you probably know more about this than I do. But it felt like America didn't belong in that war after a certain point. It got dragged out. It dragged through the 60s and into the 70s. People started to protest it, right? Jane Fonda famously was protesting against Vietnam War. And so eventually there's a bit of a split where the hippies didn't really trust the people in power. And in some ways, we're still dealing with the echoes of that split. You have those who fight the wars and support the wars, and those who are kind of outside of the military-industrial complex. And I hate to say it, but we are still living that life, right? We're in the endless war even now. And Biden just talked about ending the endless war, but there's been a war for your guys' entire lives, basically, right? You haven't seen in America without a war, at least not your conscious memories, which is an unbelievable thing to say. There is a way to run a country without flushing a bunch of money down the toilet fighting these endless wars. So anyways, that's a bit of a tangent. And so what you end up with is this sense of we can't trust the older generation, right? When Morinaga goes out into the world, he feels like he was lied to. That's what these early chapters are. He's struggling with these questions of good and evil. What was once good has become evil, and he doesn't really know what to do and where to turn. But his teacher, when he meets his teacher, and again, this is the Roshi that I was warning you guys about. basically says, you have to believe in me. You have to trust me. Here's the quote on page 25. Listening to you now, I can see that you've reached a point where there's nothing you can believe in, but there's no such thing as practice without believing in your teacher. Can you believe in me? And of course, Morinaga is like, yeah, no problem, buddy. I'll believe in you. But he's kind of insincere, right? He can't really believe in anybody. And so this beginning to the book is about believing in the teacher. Have we seen something like this before? Believing in the teacher. Where else have we seen believing in the teacher?
Wasn't it like what is it, pure perception? Not having like negative sort of like ideas of the teacher.
Yes, I'm glad that got your guys' attention. That was a big part of the exam, right? Was this exact question, believing in your teacher. And something we were talking about in our group in the beginning of class was how there's a strong parallel between what we're going to see in this book, Novice to Master, Trusting in Your Teacher, between this and what we saw in Tantric Buddhism. It's not exactly the same, but I encourage you to look for it, right? And if it's something you're interested in, you could even write a paper about it. I think that's the third prompt. So anyway, so this is just to say the beginning of the book kind of sets it up where Morinaga is of this generation where he feels like he can't trust his elders, let's say, the government and the people who were in charge. They broke his trust, right? They betrayed standards of goodness that that were being kind of given to him. And so he doesn't know what to do with his trust. And then his teacher comes out and says, you must trust me in order to do this practice. And of course, this comes in with this idea of belief in the teacher. Again, it's something we saw with pure perception, and here it is in Zen Buddhism. But it's not only belief in the teacher, and I think maybe this is one difference that we didn't see as much in Tantric Buddhism, is we also need to believe in ourselves. So maybe we can start with the very beginning of the book, which we kind of skipped over a moment ago. It starts on a weird note. I told you that this tradition is strange, right? And sort of it disrupts your usual way of thinking, right? On page 11, it's basically the first page of the book. Everything before that is like acknowledgments and table of contents and stuff. So it's really page number 1, effectively. In the first paragraph of the first page, he's like giving a talk, and he asks, did you all have time to urinate? Right? That'd be like if I opened up after the break, I'd be like, hey, did everybody have a nice urination during the break? Right? It's kind of a weird question to ask. Even if it's true, I don't really want to know about it most of the time, right? And yet here's Morinaga coming out, and he doubles down, right? A couple paragraphs down, he says, pissing is something that no one else can do for you. Only you can piss for yourself. And he says it again, you have to piss for yourself. Nobody else can piss for you, is to make an utterly serious statement. What is serious about this statement? What is serious about pissing for yourself? Now, clearly it's strange. It's sort of like one of these koans that I warned you about, right? It's supposed to get you thinking. What is this weird old man even talking about, right? Why is he talking about pissing all of a sudden? So once the strangeness wears off, though, I would actually agree with him. Do you guys agree with him? Is this a serious statement? Is there something profound about saying only you can piss for yourself? I guess, first of all,
Yeah.
Is it true? Can anybody piss for you? Chat? Can anybody piss for you?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so, right? I don't think so. So what's serious about it?
I think I was gonna say like it's saying that like no one can piss for you. Like it, I don't know how to say this because it's like such a weird phrase, but like there is truth behind it. Like no one can piss for you. Like you have to do it for yourself. So I guess I don't know like if it's supposed to like mean that like no one can. I'm trying to make the connection to this. Like no one can I just don't know how to make the connection for this. Sorry.
That's okay. We're working through it together. Kevin says it's an example of the things others cannot perform for you. That's good. You must put in the effort yourself. Yeah, that's right. And so I like the way you guys are thinking. We haven't quite nailed it down yet, but like Kevin said, we can start to make a list. Like, what are the things that only I can do for myself? There's actually not so many of them, is there? That only you can do for yourself? Pissing is actually sort of unique in that regard. You can probably come up with a few other things. And as you're thinking about that, there's a nice story about these monks who go off to China. And again, this is the preface. Like, it's only 2 pages. All we get is piss and then the story. So it's like, this is a weird preface. It's a weird book. But I promise there is something to this. And so that also is part of the koan. If it's just weird and you brush it off, you're like, well, that's weird, I'm not going to think about that, then it's not as useful. But if it's weird and you have, I'm going to call it what it is, belief, right? Belief that there is something to be gained from this weird story, then all of a sudden something interesting happens, right? You start to wrestle with it. You start to think about it. And I can tell that's what you guys are doing, because hopefully by this point in the semester, you trust me, right? You trust that I am going to bring interesting books to your life and hopefully help you understand them, right? So you give it a chance and you think, yeah, only I can piss for myself. That's true. So let's think about the story. We don't have to read it. It's a guy, actually his name is Ken, I think. Would that be Ren in Chinese? It's a weird rendering of the Chinese word. I'm not exactly sure what the Chinese name would be, but we have Ken, like Barbie and Ken. And then we also have Genjoza. And so I won't read it for you. You probably already read it. It's page 11 and 12. But Ken wants to stay at home and meditate, right? Have you guys ever had this experience before where like you say, I don't know, I have an exam on Monday. I can't go out with you, right? Have your friends ever tried to like get you out from your regular life? I guess that's not a great example to be using during the pandemic, but let's imagine a normal time a couple of years ago where you were busy studying for an exam and your friends tried to pull you out of your room. Let's see, Kevin came up with something. It's a good analogy. For example, if you want to be successful, only you can fully control that. Only you can make yourself get up every day and do your job, etc. Yeah, that's right. So you guys are getting this. Okay. Like chewing, you have to chew and swallow. What if you're like a baby bird, Kevin? Couldn't a mama bird chew for me? I guess I would have to swallow for myself. So yeah, we have Genjoza trying to pull Ken out from his dorm room, and Ken is like, no, I need to study. I want to stay at home. I want to achieve enlightenment. And Genjoza is like, hey, you can practice. You can study when you're on the road. You know, let's say you have an art history exam. Let's go to the Met. You can actually look at some art. Come on, let's go to the Met. And so they go to the Met, and then eventually Ken keeps sort of whining and complaining. And eventually Genjoza says, hey, I'm going to take care of everything except for 5 things. I can't wear clothes for you. I can't eat for you. I can't shit for you. I can't piss for you. And I can't carry your body around and live your life for you. And then the next line, it is said that upon hearing these words, the monk Ken suddenly awakened from his deluded dream and attained a great enlightenment, a great satori. That's the Japanese word for enlightenment. And I'll just keep reading for you. I hope that as you read this, you will realize that I'm not just talking about myself or about something that happened elsewhere. No, it is about your own urgent problems that I speak. And so this really, it is a book that tries to light a fire under your ass. It's basically saying, if you want to, I think Kevin really got it here. If you want to make something happen, whether it's enlightenment or a project or some other goal you're trying to achieve, you got to do it, right? And the most obvious example for me, you guys want to get a good grade in this class. I know a lot of you do. Some of you have even emailed me about it, said, hey, I want to get a good grade in your class. And you know what my response is? Only you can piss for yourself, students. Only you can piss for yourself. And so it's a message that runs through this book and it runs through this tradition, right? Remember other power? Amitabha would say, yeah, everybody come to my Pure Land. You're all going to get A's. But I'm sorry, we're done with Pure Land. It's time for some self-power. So it's time for you guys to make some things happen. With that being said, let's talk about trash. So this is one of the prompts. It's probably my favorite chapter of the book. It's relatively early on. We might have even read it for last class. I think it was, yeah, just the end of the reading for last class. So you might have read it for last week, and I apologize if you've already forgotten it. But it is very short, and so you can look back at it now. The chapter is called "There Is No Trash." It's page 27. And I think if it weren't late and we weren't already a little bit tired, I'd probably do a breakout room. But I think because it is late and we're a little tired, I'm not going to do that. But that means you guys got to work with me. And it looks like, judging from your last response, you're ready to do that. So please keep up the energy. So let's think about trash. I guess, first of all, why are we talking about this? So Zwegan Roshi says, there is no trash. On page 27 at the bottom, Morinaga goes up to him. He had kind of cleaned up around the yard. He has this pile of leaves. I'm sure you guys have done this sort of work before, right? Where you got to rake up leaves. Maybe some of you have lived in the city your whole life and you haven't, but I'm sure you can imagine what it would take to rake up leaves. And Morinaga's confused because he takes this trash, or what he thinks is trash, up to his teacher, and the teacher yells at him, and he says, there is no trash. Why does the teacher say that?
Because the trash can be used to, I remember in one of the pages, let me see if I could find it. It was like you could, like, let's say like there's a hole like in the sidewalk. You could like use the dirt or the leaves to like kind of like repair it, sort of.
Yeah,
you know, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So there are 3 different steps to this interaction, and we can go through all of them. But yeah, one of them is like clumps of dirt, right? Which look pretty useless. Morinaga's thinking like, this is pretty useless trash. Can I please throw this away? And then Roshi's like, no, no, no. There are little, divots in the ground. Just fill up the divots of ground with the clumps of dirt, and you'll kind of make it all level and more easy to walk on. All right, that was Kevin's last comment. Kyla says, there's no trash because it all came from the earth, and everything on the earth is there for a purpose. Yeah, we can find the purpose. One man's trash, another man's treasure. Also, common saying, that's true. When it comes to the leaves, what can we do with leaves to turn them into treasure? So Raffaele told us about the clumps of dirt. There were leaves. There were also pebbles. The pebbles are a little harder to imagine. It's something like making a drain, isn't it, with the pebbles? What do we do with the leaves? You could compost the soil, make it grow things. That's true. I think here they talk about using it for a fire to heat up a bath, because in the old days, maybe they didn't have electricity they didn't have hot water necessarily. They had to boil it for fuel. Yeah, exactly. In some ways, the exact details of this aren't so important. It's more kind of, what are they pointing at? So does this mean that Zwegan Roshi, so again, that's this guy's name, Zwegan Roshi, does that mean he's like some kind of environmentalist? Why is he talking about trash? I guess, first of all, let's think a bit more about trash. What, let's say we're going through our refrigerator. Have you guys ever done this before? You're cleaning out the refrigerator. Something you got to do every now and then. It's not the most fun thing to do. Let's say you're going through the refrigerator. You're saying trash, not trash, trash, not trash. How do you differentiate what is trash and what is not trash?
Whether it's supposed to be chunky or not.
That's pretty good. Yeah, chunky if the food is spoiled or spilled, probably spoiled. Expiration date. Okay, that's one way to do it. Exactly. Am I actually going to eat this? What is the woman's name? Something Kondo, Marianne Kondo. What is it, Marie? Yeah, Marie Kondo. Does this spark joy? Right. If it doesn't spark joy, then get rid of it. So how do we differentiate trash from not trash? Can anybody make a general statement about this? Can we make a kind of an abstract comment? What makes something into trash? Very good. value or utility. If it has a use or not, exactly. Yeah, we live in a society where we need efficiency, we need useful things, and if they're not useful anymore, we got to get rid of them. Obviously, there's some people like I'm sure you've heard of hoarders before on the shows about hoarders, where they think everything's useful and they just want to keep it all, right? But still, they probably do that same calculus. Is it useful? Is it not useful? If it's not useful, get rid of it. Obviously, this question of use becomes important, right? And so that's sort of what is being illustrated in this story. And if we only talked about things, it's still a pretty interesting conversation. But you might be wondering, what does this have to do with Buddhism? And if we look at Dogen Roshi, he kind of expands on it. So at the end of the story, he says this. He says, from the first, in people and in things, there is no such thing as trash. And so that is a bit more interesting of a statement. Have you guys ever said people are trash? Can people be trash? That does happen. It's sort of a colloquial thing that people say, right? Shows up on Twitter. You can say like an abstract concept is trash. You can say somebody's hot take is trash, but you can say a person is trash too, right? They can act like it. Yeah. Somebody acts like trash. We call them trash. Maybe we can try to do the same thing. What makes a person trash? There's no expiration date, right? We can't use the chunky meter that we used for food a moment ago. What makes a person trash? A bad personality? Yeah. Is there like a place we can put trashy people? Obviously, we can put trashy things in a trash can. What do we do with trashy people? Cancel them? No, I'm just thinking about Twitter. There's sort of a wider way to think about this too. Degenerative attitudes. That's a very interesting word. Degenerative. Okay. Yeah, bad personality, bad attitude. Where do we put people who are not useful anymore? Trashy people. It's sort of a weird way to put it, but I think there is something, or maybe many things we could bring into this conversation.
Could it be like jail?
That's
Like
what I had in
people
mind.
that don't like
Please.
people that don't have like anything to really add to society, only bad things like crime and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I hate to reduce it down and say that the people who go to jail are trash, but that's kind of how we treat them, isn't it? And I don't mean to say that we should burn down all of the prisons, because I think that would cause more problems than good. Actually, I don't know if I should share this story. It's kind of disturbing today. I was riding the train because I had a bunch of stuff I had to do today. I had some meetings and things before class. And so I decided to ride the train instead of walk. And I was about to go sit down. And then a dude was like, hey, you don't want to sit down there. And I looked, actually, the seat I was going to sit down in was fine. But across the way, it looked like it was paint. And I was like, oh, somebody had sort of an accident here. It was blood. Somebody, and then the dude was like, somebody got stabbed here. And I was like, what? It was like a massive amount of blood. It was all smeared out on the seat on the train car. I was like, this is insane. How is this train not like stopped and the cops swarming all around it? But it went all the way to 42nd Street. And I asked the dude, he was like, yeah, it was a few stops ago. Somebody stabbed the other guy. I was like, where are they now? And he's like, oh, you know what people do. They just scattered. It's like, I don't know what people do in this situation. And nobody was really alarmed. And so once we got to 242nd Street, I was like, blood, stabbing, something happened over here. And then they're like, oh, somebody reported this, but I didn't realize that they were bleeding. So in any case, I guess, yeah, normal Tuesday on the one, I guess so, man. It was a weird moment. I decided not to take a picture because I was like, this is too disturbing. I would prefer not to remember this scene. And so in any case, the reason I bring that up is because we can't have people stabbing each other on the train, right? I feel like somebody should get arrested in this situation. Yeah, exactly. It was an eye opener. So in any case, I'm a believer in prison. I think they do serve a purpose in society. So at the same time, why do you think Dragan Roshi is talking about there is no trash with people too? How could we do the same sort of exercise? And I hope I didn't disturb you guys too much. How can we do, but I do want to show that there are some stakes here, right? How do we do the same sort of exercise with people? Let's imagine this guy who stabbed some other guy on the train today and made it bleed all over the seat. Is that person trash? Why would Dragan Roshi say no, that that person is not trash? From one perspective, they are not useful in our polite train riding society. They're not useful in this class because they might stab somebody else, and so we don't want to invite them on campus. There are many places where we don't want to invite them, right? What would Dragan Roshi say? What do you think? How do we do this exercise for people? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very nicely stated. Yeah. Let's see. Gregory says, reminds me of the story of the guy who cut people's fingers off. Buddha saw Buddha nature in him, aka not trash. I guess. Yes, right. Angulimala. That's a good explanation too. So we've seen precedents for this in Buddhism. If you couldn't hear what Sophie was saying, is we need to see people as people, right? It's too easy to kind of mark somebody as this scary, threatening person with a knife, which if they had been on the train, I would certainly have marked them as. But as Sophie reminds us, that person, even if they're holding a knife and they're stabbing somebody, is still a person, right? And this is where it's easy to talk about Buddha nature as some sort of abstract concept, but this is where Buddha nature gets real, right? So when the guy with the knife also has Buddha nature, it's hard to imagine that. It's hard to imagine that. And one reason is because of fear. I am afraid of that person, and I don't want to see them as a person. Ciara says people can also change, become better people in which they can become useful to society, quote unquote useful. Yeah, exactly. And so we need to think too, is what is the purpose of a prison? Is it there to punish them and lock them up and keep them away from all of us polite people? Or is it there to reform them, like Ciara is saying, right? And maybe this person, like Sophie was saying, there are certain circumstances that brought them to this moment. We don't know what's happening in their life or what has happened in their life, what sort of emotional trauma they have experienced and that they're working through, right? And if we maybe give them the help that they need, arguably even deserve, right? Then maybe they can become, like Ciara is saying, quote unquote, useful to society as well, right? They can kind of come back and join us and be truly reformed. So, okay, we can do it. Dragan Roshi would be proud of us, right? And even though it's sort of a hard exercise, and again, I'm not here to say we should get rid of prisons. I think there is room for prisons. At the same time, we can also imagine good people, right? People who end up in prison, incarcerated people, right? People who are incarcerated for perhaps unjust reasons. One kind of interesting tidbit in New York is Cuomo announced recently that people who are locked up for nonviolent drug charges, a lot of them are potentially going to be released soon because the laws around weed are changing, right? You can have weed dispensaries. So I haven't actually seen these things open up yet, but obviously it's already happened in other states, and I think New York is next. And so it would not make sense if somebody was incarcerated for selling marijuana and now it is legal to sell marijuana. All of a sudden that person is not trash anymore, and we can bring them back into polite society as well. So that's sort of an interesting point, and I think we have connected it to Buddhism pretty nicely. I'm going to argue there's one more layer to this, which is worth considering, is us, right? So we were just talking about other people, and being disturbed by blood on the train. So I apologize if I've disturbed any of you, but this is disturbing for me on my way to my office this morning. It was the afternoon. So when we apply it to ourselves, do you guys ever think of yourself as trash? Or even parts of yourself? Do you ever think of yourself or parts of yourself as trash? I know that's a weird way of phrasing it, but it's part of the same conversation, right? It's labeling something as useless, as something, it's a way you don't want it to be, right? You don't want to give it space in your being. And we can leave this hypothetical if you don't want to get too personal. You could give something more abstract, right? What are some parts of a person that we might label as trash? Or when do we beat ourselves up and say that part of me is not useful? I wish I were not that way. I wish that were better, even. I wish that were different. Do you guys ever think about yourselves this way? Of course you do. Again, you don't have to get too personal. It's already late. We're probably all having difficulty just focusing and staying awake. But I encourage you to think about it, right? What parts of me do I label as trash? What parts of me do I sort of get on my own case about? Like, oh, I'm so stupid for doing that, right? An easy example is, schoolwork. It doesn't have to be schoolwork, but you can wish you did better on this thing or wish you did better on that thing. And maybe there's some voice in the back of your head that talks to you and tells you that, oh, you're so stupid for doing this wrong or for saying that thing or embarrassing yourself in this way. We've all made these mistakes before. I certainly have recently, right? All the time. And so it's very easy to kind of get on your own case, isn't it? And just to make a connection to what we were doing before, that's kind of what's going on here, right? The dust comes in and we get upset about the dust. You're like, oh, there's more dust. I got to clean the dust off, right? So yeah, just making a little connection there. And so when we apply this to ourselves, that's probably the most useful part of this exercise. Is that from the first in people and in things, and of course you're all people, we ourselves are people, there is no trash. And so the second part of this chapter, again, it's very short. This is the power of this book. We've only been discussing a few short pages, but there's always so much to say about them. We get the story that we went over about the leaves and the rocks and the clumps of dirt. That goes pretty quickly. On page 29, they talk about Buddha nature. And again, that's something we've talked about today quite a bit. So hopefully that makes sense. He talks about wonder of wonders. I'm looking at page 29. Wonder of wonders. Intrinsically, all living beings are Buddhas endowed with wisdom and virtue. Only because they cling to this, to their delusive thinking, do they fail to realize this, right? And so what is the practice is just realization. I attain Buddhahood together with all the grasses, the trees, and the great earth. I think that's kind of nice, this idea of achieving Buddhahood with the grasses and trees. How can grasses and trees achieve enlightenment? Do they have minds that can be enlightened? Have we talked about being reborn as grasses and trees? That's not an option, is it? So how can they achieve enlightenment? It's sort of a trick question. I don't know if I'd call it a koan, but it's sort of a tricky thing. There's a sense that maybe they don't have a mind separate from my mind, but if I achieve enlightenment, then my mind fuses with them, right? And the distance between self and other collapses, and all things are enlightened. So it doesn't really matter if they have a separate mind or not, right? When I achieve enlightenment, all things achieve enlightenment. And then finally, there's this discussion. This is what the thing I wanted to ask you guys about was about desires. And this is something I kind of tested you on in the exam. Are all desires bad, right? That was one question. I think it was from the first exam. I forget exactly how I worded it, but something to the effect of, according to the Four Noble Truths, are all desires bad, right? And wholesome desires versus craving were two different terms from early Buddhism. And here we see it again. I'll just read it to you on page 30. There's a young woman, an ardent believer in Christianity. She had this to say. She said, listening to your talk today, I could see that about all Buddhism tells us to do is throw away our desires. On the other hand, Christianity says, ask and it shall be given to you, blah, blah. Let's see, does he respond to this directly? Yeah, this idea of asking and you shall receive. Buddhism points out on page 31, however, after all, the seeking, what we attain is the realization that what we have sought was always from the first already ours. After the pounding away, we awaken to the fact that the door was already open before we even began to knock. And so it's sort of a strange, if we zoom out from this chapter, it's sort of a strange assembly of pieces. And I encourage you guys to think about this way as you read this book. We've got there is no trash. We've got Buddha nature. Those sort of go together. But then there's this weird thing about desire and knocking and receiving and then realizing that everything you wanted was already there. How do we make sense of this last part? Can anybody tie this in? So again, it's page 30 to 31. This thing about desires and ask and you shall receive, and then realizing that everything's already there. What does this have to do with trash and Buddha nature? Can we make this connection?
At least with Buddha nature, like it's kind of similar. Like Buddha nature, like everyone has it. You just have to find it.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like asking you shall receive is sort of like it, but like it's more, the case can be made a lot easier for the it was always there. Like Buddha nature is always with people.
Okay.
So, and like that's what helps you attain enlightenment. So that's sort of like it was already like there, you just never knew.
Okay, that's a great connection. So what Stephen's saying is this idea of we don't even need to ask because it is already here. That connects to Buddha nature because Buddha nature is already here. I think that's a great response. Other thoughts? What about there is no trash? Does the idea of there not being trash connects to this transformation from throw away your desires to everything you want is already here? What I'm trying to lead you toward, and this is just my hot take, and maybe it's just time for me to share it with you, is we've talked this entire semester about how desire is bad and it's going to cause problems for you and all that sort of thing. Desire is trash, right? Craving is trash. That's a fundamental Buddhist idea in a lot of ways. And what Zen is telling you to do is to reimagine that, rethink that question. He's not saying, sensual pleasure is a great idea. He's not saying that you should go out and get wasted all the time and, do whatever it is that your sensual pleasure desires are. But what he is saying is desire is just sort of a mistaken notion, right? All the things that you want, you already have. You're just looking at things wrong. He's not. It's almost like taking a middle way on desire itself. Rather than saying desire is good or desire is bad, it's basically saying desire isn't really even a thing, right? You don't need to desire things. You've already got what you need. And so if you ever feel like you don't, then you're just looking at it wrong. And so you have to reimagine the way in which you look. It's basically saying even desire itself is not trash, right? It's trying to reimagine trash, the dust, right? The dust that Shinsho was so nervously wiping off of his mirror. All of this is being retrieved, recovered, and remodeled, reimagined as all part of enlightenment itself. Thoughts on this? Like I said, this is one of my favorite chapters. Even though it's very short, there's a lot you can get out of it. And if you think this is a cool chapter, you can write a paper about it. So I basically made it very open. I said, hey, compare it to the greater vehicle. I gave you the chapter from Kyon on the greater vehicle, or you could write about anything else we've read that might be tied into this conversation. Greater vehicle is very, very loose. So that's the prompt. And if you want to write about this, but you don't want to write about the greater vehicle, you could tie into some other theme of your choosing too. So anyways, that's just a little plug for There Is No Trash. Other thoughts or questions on this? That was a good conversation. There is no trash. This is a koan, right? It's a powerful image that you can kind of wrestle with. In some ways, what it collapses is self and other as well, right? When we label something as trash, we are pushing it away. We're saying, I don't want you anymore. I don't need you anymore. You're not useful to me anymore. And what this is saying is that is a problem, right? This will lead to a further feeling of isolation from the world. And a true sense of enlightenment comes with the grasses and the trees and all things, right? It pervades all things. And so to label some things off as useless and throw them away is contrary to the pursuit of enlightenment. Seeing Dew was sort of a cute story. We don't have to go into this in as much detail. There are a ton of little stories, right? We could just spend all class going through all of them, and I suppose that's what we will do for the next 20 minutes or so. This one, it's only a few pages, three little pages. The character Dew here was Morinaga Roshi had sort of arranged it, or sorry, Zoigan Roshi had arranged this calligraphy in a corner in his room, and he sent Morinaga to go look at it, but he doesn't really tell him that, right? He says, hey, go into my room, and from my desk, look toward the alcove. He doesn't really give him very clear instructions, and Morinaga goes in, and he's really nervous, and he's like, oh no, I must have messed something up. I should have cleaned it up better. He's probably going to reprimand me. He's probably going to get on my case. What did I do wrong? What did I mess up? And then he comes back and he says to his teacher, I don't understand what I did wrong. Please show me. And then the teacher says, you fool. Who said you did anything wrong? This morning I put a single rose of Sharon in the bud vase. It goes well with the scroll and looks beautiful. This is the character on the scroll. So I told you to take a look at it. You did see the flower, didn't you? And then, of course, it dawns on him that he didn't even notice the flower, right? He was so nervous that he had messed something up. Maybe he did something wrong that he didn't even get to enjoy the thing his teacher was trying to show him. And this line about scales dropping from his eyes is at the bottom of the page. It's a very powerful image. It's so powerful, I'm going to write it in the chat. Scales dropping from his eyes. What do you think that means, to have scales drop from your eyes? Let's look up some scales on the internet. That's the wrong kind of scale. What's an animal that has scales? Snake scales? Yeah, that's more what I'm talking about. So what do you think it means to have scales drop from your eyes? I guess fish probably have scales too. Yeah.
Would it be like blinding you and it dropping from your eyes, meaning you can now see whatever the meaning was behind it?
Exactly. It's a beautiful image, isn't it? Have the scales drop from your eyes. And again, it ties in with this idea of everything already being sort of enlightened as it is, everything arguably being perfect as it is, but we have scales over our eyes, so we are not able to see it. And this little story very nicely illustrates what those scales are, right? When we are so caught up in our own nervous performance about doing good and being liked, yeah, like shedding the skin from your eyes. It's a very powerful image. When we get caught up in all these nervous pursuits, right? We might not see things as they are. And again, it comes back to this point that Alexandra pointed out earlier. For Zen, the practice is no practice. That is how you see clearly. There's talk of Confucius. This is sort of an interesting one. You guys might be thinking, Confucius? Now, he's not very Buddhist, is he? And that's true. One thing to keep in mind about Zen is it's mostly an East Asian tradition, even though they point to Bodhidharma and India as kind of the inspiration. The reality is it's heavily influenced by Taoism, and here we can even see Confucius show up. We don't have to go through this. We don't have to go through any of the stories, but maybe just a highlight from this one on page 39. There is this question about humility versus what do they call it? Self-cherishing self-defense. So maybe this is something we can kind of jump back to this initial slide. Would you agree with me that this belief and doubt combination involves a certain degree of humility? Maybe I'll state this a little differently. What is the difference between being arrogant and believing in yourself? When does believing in yourself turn into arrogance? What do you guys think? Right? Because we talked about believing in yourself is a big part of the Zen tradition, and it is. And yet, you don't want to be arrogant, right? Arrogant feels like a bad idea. So what's the difference between your believing in yourself and being arrogant? I think it has to do with confidence level. Okay.
Would it have to do with doubt, like not doubting yourself? Like if you were overly confident, you would have no doubt. You would always just think that you're the best. Whereas if you believe in yourself but have doubt, you would know that you have the potential but not there yet with it.
That's nicely stated. And I think Stephen is trying to, process what we were talking about earlier. I think this is good. Being cocky and thinking you're above everybody else. Yeah, it's usually sort of comparative, right? Arrogance often comes with like, yeah, I'm the best, right? I'm better than everybody else. You walk in the room, act like you're better than everybody else. And, I hate to constantly make things political, but our former president was like the embodiment of arrogance, right? And some people really celebrated that about him, right? They might have even sort of bought into it and be like, yeah, you are the best, right? That's why you're the president. And he's a rich guy and all these other things, right? So it's sort of part of his show in a way. And I think it also highlights that in America, this is something we quietly respect in a way too, right? We kind of like arrogance. I hate to say it, but we do. And, I don't mean I'm immune from it either, right? A part of me wants to be like the best guy in the room all the time too. There's a bit of competition, and whoever's the best is the best, and they should act like they're the best. And so this question of how to be humble is actually sort of a hard question. How to be humble, but still know how to believe in yourself. Because a lot of the time we're taught you're either first or you're last, right? Isn't that Ricky Bobby or something? And nice guys finish last and all this sort of thing. And so the question is, how do you avoid this trap of being overly confident, this kind of cocky, arrogant sort of way of being, and maybe being too humble to the point where you don't believe in yourself anymore, right? I'd say they're sort of mirror images of each other, and it's very easy to fall into the two traps. And so that's kind of what this is about. But this one is not about being cocky. This is about being too humble in a way, or trying to be humble, but failing, frankly. And so I'll save the details for you, but we can go into some of the, I'll save the larger story, but we can go into some of the details. There's this student named Ran. I think the J is pronounced like an R because it's, again, sort of a weird way of rendering Chinese characters. You don't have to worry about that. But Ran Yu, basically, well, let's see. On page 39 at the top, he says, you know what? There's this other student. He looks pretty good. Here's what he says. It is not that I do not believe in the wonderful way, in the wonderful teachings that Confucius has, and my excellent seniors like Yan Hui have practiced. It's only that some of us lack the power to practice the way. And he might have been thinking like, I'm just being humble. And I'm just saying, I don't have the ability to do this thing. But then Confucius really jumps up and scolds him. He says, lack of ability is an excuse for those who have at least tried, at least come part way. But you, before even setting out to try anything, you set limits on your ability. And then he goes down and kind of continues. He says, this is not humility. It is nothing more than self-cherishing self-defense. self-cherishing self-defense. I'll write that in the chat. Have you guys ever tried self-cherishing self-defense? Again, it's something I'm familiar with. It's either I want to win the game or I'm not going to play the game. Right? I'm going to try and get an A on the exam, or I'm not going to try. And then I don't care what my grade is because I didn't try. If I don't try, then the scorer can never hurt me. It's a defense mechanism, right? Just like Confucius is sort of getting on his students' case about. It's very easy to just give up because it seems like you won't get the result that you want. I'm sure you guys all have experience with this too, right? It's sort of, it's an immature way of approaching the world, but it's one that is around us all the time, and it protects us. What does it protect us from? It protects us from trying and failing. Because if you try and you fail, then you really are weak or dumb or not up to the task or whatever, right? Well, all these things we're afraid of being. But what Confucius is saying, if you do not try, then you are not being humble. You are just cowering and hiding from the task itself. So what would his advice be? Would be, of course, to try, right? And if we come back to this belief, doubt, and determination triad, if you already have this kind of proper approach to doubt, approach to humility, would it sting so bad if you lost the game? Would it hurt so bad if you were rejected from the job or the company or the person even or whatever? No, it's fine. You know, I know what I can be. I might not be there yet. I might not be there right now in the situation, but maybe next time I will be, right? Maybe next time, maybe the time after that. It is less surprising, right? It's just like when we talked about impermanence. We are constantly surprised when things break, when things go away, when things die. I'm surprised when I found blood on the subway system, right? But maybe I shouldn't be, right? Our bodies are all full of blood. Sometimes that blood comes out for whatever reason. And so maybe I shouldn't be so surprised by it. And so this doubt, it's almost playing with this idea, right? When we have in our minds this sense that I'm not at my full capacity, I'm not where I need to be, there is a little bit of space for these sorts of criticisms, and they sting quite a bit less when we are prepared for them. That being said, Morinaga also, as a teacher, we see sort of a cute side of him when he's teaching people. He also is a little bit soft, right? When he's dealing with students who maybe don't know exactly what they're doing. Let's see, what page is that, 46? Have you guys ever tried to help and then been totally unprepared in trying to help? Like maybe when you're a kid trying to help your parents do something and you actually have no idea what to do in the kitchen. And maybe if your parents are very patient, they would teach you what to do. If they're impatient and stressed out, they would just tell you to go away. Probably you've had experience with both of these things. And Morinaga gives sort of a cute little story going through that on 46. Like I'll save the details, but the very end of the line is sort of heartwarming, right? He says, I cannot get angry at young people like this because I was exactly like them at one time, right? And so when we are on the other side of this same sort of, let's say, ignorance or confusion and so forth, again, it's important to reach out and remember what it is like to be the confused student, because we can help guide people along. Again, kind of a cute story on 46. We have 10 minutes left, and in those 10 minutes, I want to at least get to these koans because I promised these to you. These are a few common koans. One of them is sort of a disturbing one. Kill the Buddha. Kill the Buddha. How could they say that? Kill the Buddha. And you know, I hopefully I don't get in trouble for putting this up on the board. Context is very important, but where does it say? kill or die. Yeah, on 44. Phrases such as kill the Buddha, kill the ancestors, and even kill your father, kill your mother show up throughout the writings of the Zen sect. How do we make sense of this Zen phrase, kill the Buddha? Do they literally mean kill the Buddha? Sometimes it's stated a bit in a longer fashion. It's if you ever encounter the Buddha on the road, kill him. How do we make sense of this puzzling statement? I'll let you think about it for a moment. Belief in Zen is working through in practice exactly what on earth all this means when you hear a saying like kill the Buddha. Regardless of what one is told, regardless of the task assigned, one tenaciously carries it through without complaint. This diligence characterized the first stage of my life as a novice monk. So again, here's belief. He's kind of working through this term for us. Sophie? Mm-hmm. Yes, and so it's all part of the game, right? You going into it, you know your teacher is saying this weird thing, like Sophie's saying. You trust that there's some sort of hidden meaning. There's some sort of meaning that is to be discerned. You believe that, right? But then there's also doubt. So then accepting that the words have another deeper meaning, yet not knowing what that meaning is, the student finds himself or herself assailed by a great doubt. Driven by this doubt, spurred on by constant sense of a problem, they then proceed desperately with concentrated practice. This, in Zen, is what it means to believe. So again, here we have belief and doubt, not just in yourself and in your capacity, but in riddles, in koans, right? In the things that happen in your life, in the teachings that a teacher provides to you. So some people interpret this as you don't want to hold on to the Buddha too tightly, right? If the Buddha is some sort of life raft or something, maybe it can kind of get you out of a tough spot. But to just like the patriarch tearing up the sutra, right? He could be tearing up a picture of the Buddha here too. He could be destroying a statue of the Buddha here too. It would have kind of a similar effect, right? Zen has been called iconoclastic. You guys ever heard that term before? That's a special religious studies term, but it just, as you can see, the root is icon, klasm. I don't know, it's probably a Greek word, but it basically means to destroy. It's the destruction of icons. It's the rejection of icons. And so in a way, what Zen is doing is it's saying, look away from the words and the images and focus on the enlightenment, right? The image of the Buddha itself can be a distraction if you approach it in the wrong way. And the same with your parents and the same with your ancestors. Those ones are a little too close to home for me. So maybe we can leave those alone. Another one, these are all samples I took from throughout the book. See, look at all the hard work I do for you guys, putting all these koans together in one place. Show your original face before the birth of your mother and father. This koan asks, in other words, what was your true form before your parents gave you birth? Again, it's a weird thing to say, right? What is my original form before the birth of my mother and father? Where does your mind go when you start to think about that? Well, first of all, you think about, well, where did this face come from? And then you can kind of almost like travel back in time, all the way back to when you were a little baby and you had a very different, cuter, rounder face, probably. I certainly did. And then, you're back into the womb. And then before that, it's like, what was I? I didn't even have a face. Oh my God. And you're all just sort of floating in the air. I don't know. It sends you to another place, right? It breaks things apart for you. And so, of course, what this is pointing to is no surprise, is Buddha nature, right? It's trying to take you to that fundamental being that is beyond your current faith. And it's reminding you that you are more than just your faith in this age of beautification apps and I don't know, whatever else people do on Snapchat, right? You are more than just your faith. And so the way you do this practice is actually you have a meeting with your teacher and you try to kind of give an answer to this question. In due course, the teacher will shout, "I'm not asking for explanations. Get rid of your theories and show me your original faith." The monk winds up at his wit's end. Again, it's a little bit macho, but there is this sort of give and take. It would be like, I force you all to turn your cameras right now and to show me your original faith. I'm not that Zen, so I'm not going to make you do that, but I could, right? I could. I don't know if you guys would actually do it. And so then some, these are kind of classic koans, your face before your mother and father were born. But then some kind of subtle things happen too. This one about tying his shoe is the teacher bows down and ties his shoe. And then Morinaga begins to think, oh, my teacher is kind of binding my practice and trying to give me encouragement through the tying of his shoe. And so one thing you can imagine is, how to put this, these koans are an isolated practice, right? They feel a little abstract and they feel a little, I don't know, unnatural, right? You're sort of pulling them out of nowhere and using them as a form of practice. But eventually you can take the same sort of practice and apply it to your entire life, right? Weird things will happen and you can begin to interpret it and think, what is this koan of, I don't know, I hate to fixate on this, but the weird thing I saw on the subway today, right? That was a weird, disturbing moment and it just forced me to think about my life upside down. Absolutely, right? And if I were more dedicated to koan practice, then maybe I would even come up with some sort of Zen explanation of it. But it doesn't have to be that complicated. Seeing my student at the pizza place today, right? That sort of interaction where it's like, oh, yeah, what was that kid's name? Yeah, I forget. I remember he was a good kid in class, though. He had red hair. He was kind of nice, outgoing, right? Easy to talk to. And then he gave me my pizza and called me professor. And it was this sort of nice little moment. And as I'm walking away, I'm thinking about sort of these funny things that happen in life. I've been to that pizza place, I don't know, a dozen times in the last year. And this is the first time I ever saw him. It totally transformed the experience. And so this koan practice, at first it feels a little quaint. It's just sort of interpreting poems or something like this. But again, it can become an entire practice of life, right? Of seeing life as a koan. And indeed, I think it was maybe the last page we read for today, Morinaga has a line about this where he talks about, or no, I think it's the final line of the book. So maybe I won't ruin it for you. But this idea of life itself being a koan and all of the things that happen to us in life being just like this, if you approach them from a certain perspective. So I think this is enough. Oh yeah, I did make a slide about this, about accepting the words, of having a deeper meaning, just like Sophie pointed out a moment ago. So here is this sense of doubt, right? There's a deeper meaning, but I don't know what it is. Again, you could apply that to most of your life. It's like, oh, there's a deeper meaning to things, but I can't quite get it. And then driven by this doubt and believing that there is this meaning, but you haven't quite gotten it yet, then there comes the determination. And of course, this is the practice of Zen and koans and stuff. So why don't we stop there? We'll talk more about teachers next time. Here's a drunk Zen master. Sometimes they do get drunk and cause a ruckus. Any last questions before we call it a night? You guys all ready? Okay. Well, I will say this, guys. There's only one more class left. I don't know if you realize that. So we're going to finish the book. We'll finish talking about it next time. There's actually plenty left to talk about. So I'm glad we were able to have the good conversations that we had today. We could kind of savor there is no trash and some of the other things. And then next time we'll just finish up. So good luck. Happy final couple weeks of school. And I'll see you guys next Tuesday, all right?